This is John Shannon, and you are in the press row.
Welcome to the Press Row. From sports media to startups, retail to revolutionaries. The Press Row. Authentic conversations with game changers and visionaries. Now here's your host, Jonah Siegel.
Jonah here, Press Row, from northern, actually, I'm told it's southern Ontario. I'm in Innisfil, Barrie, Ontario. Good to see everybody. It's been a while. Taking a couple of weeks off. The producer has been off finishing college and traveling. Today's episode is a really, really good one. So much has gone on in the world of sports, business, broadcast, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. We get the unique opportunity to sit down and talk to John Shannon, former NHL, TV, MLSE hockey guru, host of the hockey podcast right now. He was on Primetime Sports forever, a co-host of the Bob McCowan podcast. Sit back, relax. You're going to learn a lot today from John Shannon. Welcome back. Jonah here in the Press Row. On the East Coast, the sunny side, the warm side, the sun has actually come out. It has not been very warm here in, I'm not sure if this is Northern Ontario.
No, it's not. It's Southern Ontario.
Okay, just checking. Very happy to be here. Been here for just shy of a week now. Tomorrow will be a week. It's been fantastic. Getting together with old friends and some family and reuniting, as the song says, John. I am ecstatic to have a familiar face on the screen and in your ears if you're listening. John Shannon is with us. John, how are you?
I'm great, Jonah, and for all of your American friends, we're recording this on Memorial Day, so happy Memorial Day to all your American friends.
And we hope to make it memorial. So there you go. I have
memorable.
Never...
We hope to make it memorable.
Well, just trying to have a little fun with words here on a Monday morning. I have never, ever, I think this is like episode 120 for me, and for an idiot like me who just does this for fun, that I'm told that is a lot. But in the 120 that I've done, I've never prepared a note, ever, until today. And I actually have kind of an outline of what I want to talk, because I think it's actually important that we talk, because a lot of people have approached me and said, you need to discuss some topics. And I think in order to do it, you're the perfect guest. I'm not blowing smoke up your you know what, but I think there's an outline of things that we need to talk about that people really are having a difficult time grasping, both in the media and in the public. So let's go back in time, if you will. And I don't need to qualify you as an expert, so I'm not going to waste anybody's time. The MLSE ownership. And just so everybody knows, John literally jumped on my screen 2 minutes ago. Hi, how are you? Talked about this and that, and we did not discuss what we were going to talk about at all, so he's not been prepped. So the MLSE ownership, everyone said was going to be a disaster, the three-headed monster, the two companies that hate each other. And for the most part, they actually coexisted okay, right? Like, I don't know exactly how many years they were together, but for the most part, until just about now, when it's about to wrap up, they existed pretty well, all things considered. I mean, they moved the needle forward. There weren't a whole lot of public explosions that we are aware of. Their organizations, one of them won a one of the majors won a championship. Two of the minors won a couple. The big one achieved things that it had not achieved in a while. I think it's got a record for most seasons in a playoffs. But other than that, pretty harmonious considering what people were expecting.
I think you're right. But I also think that was their intent from the day Bell and Rogers signed the papers with Larry Tannenbaum. They had a side agreement that in the boardroom, they would not disagree most of the time. So most of the big decisions were already hammered out prior, and they would not vote against each other. They let Larry be the figurehead, if you were, of the organization with his position on the NBA Board of Governors and the NHL Board of Governors and MLS. So from that perspective, the companies, what they did was they built and protected an asset, and the asset was sports content, and in many ways they were visionary in it because sports content over the last 17 or 18 years has become more and more and more valuable for a multitude of reasons. I'm not even sure the people that signed the original document knew it would go this way, but it has, and that really is why it has worked, because it made business sense for all of Rogers' entities and all of Bell's entities to make sure it worked, and that the content was there for them to use at their discretion.
It's funny you say that they had this side agreement to get along for the greater good, but in the middle of it, one of them did something to try and exterminate the other, and that is sign an exclusive deal to the prize jewel, to the crown jewel, and that is to the National Hockey League rights, right? Like you can't ignore that.
But so that's the classic case of you hold your enemies close and your friends, your friends close and your enemies closer, and
right.
and that whole concept of buying rights was different than, from a corporate perspective, was different than what MLSE stood for. The people at Rogers that drove the boat on that, Keith Pelley and Scott Moore, were not on the MLSE board. Nadir Mohammed was on the board, but when they did that deal, that was a concept of trying to level the playing field, because Bell's cable network, TSN, was ahead and was winning the viewership war. And somebody said, well, we think we're okay going head to head in the summer because TSN has CFL, good numbers. We have the Jays, they said at Rogers, good numbers. What do we do in the winter? And the winter was, well, we got to have hockey. We have to have hockey. And so and by the way, the other person in the room with MLSE, with Rogers, and with Bell, so there are really four entities. The other person in the room wanted the bidding war, and that was Gary Bettman.
Of course.
And so in the end, it was a bit of a feud, but in the end, it was a pure and simple a business deal. And that didn't mean TSN was out of the NHL, because they obviously do Montreal games, Ottawa games, Winnipeg games on a regional basis.
So let's fast forward. I don't remember exactly how many months ago it was, but an announcement gets made that Bell is selling its shares. Two things happen. One, Bell, and I can't remember the exact order, and it doesn't really matter, but Bell announces it's selling its shares to Rogers, and Larry divests a part of his shares, I believe it was, to OMERS.
Well, not technically, no.
He sold part of his company, holding company. Correct.
His holding company, Kilmer Sports, to OMERS, which is a pension fund that basically manages all the money for the Ontario provincial government employees.
Right.
And not teachers, but the government employees. So, and he did that first, because it's an inevitability that Larry, as could be bought out by a certain date. That was part of the original agreement way back when, in the was it 2007 or 2008? So that Larry.
Sorry for interrupting. That date is supposed to be roughly a year from this coming July. So July 26th. Is that correct?
I'm not sure of the exact date. That would be, but it's coming soon.
Okay.
So Larry needed an evaluation of what his shares were worth. So by selling a certain percentage of it, he was able to get an evaluation, and the evaluation came back at that point. And so the evaluation came back what it was worth. And really, he didn't sell Kilmer Sports shares of MLSE. He sold Kilmer Sports shares internally to someone else. So it's a technicality, but OMERS does not have really any say at what goes on at MLSE.
But the big domino was Bell said, we're out. Rogers said, we're going to take majority.
Yep. Which they have the right to do, because the shares have to be offered to the partners before they're offered to the public.
So we're now sitting here, it's May 26th. My understanding is that as between the two parties, the transaction is effectively done. What's holding up an announcement of a sale?
Well, there's the technicality of board NHL, NBA, MLS approvals, which will be rubber stamped.
What about CFL
ownership.
and what about Major League Baseball? Do they need to say anything?
Well, Major League Baseball is not involved in this at all. Rogers owns the entity that is the Blue Jays, and so at this point that has nothing to do with what we're talking about at MLSE. Okay. CFL is just happy that somebody owns the Argonauts, let alone and pays the bills, let alone approval of the ownership situation. Okay. So I just think we're talking about a time situation of saying when will it be approved. There is an NHL board meeting. I'm sure I don't know if there's an NBA board meeting coming up.
So Adam Silver announced that there's one coming in July. The only reason we know that, or the only reason I know that, is I was in Seattle, and he said that expansion was on the agenda, and that was big news in Seattle.
So now the other thing is that both commissioners can do a vote by email. We used to say fax, but it's now by email.
Bill Waters ruined that when he got one stuck in the machine on trade deadline day.
Yeah, that was for Jarrett Stoll.
There you go.
So I just think it's a matter of time and it's just a technicality at this point.
Okay, so in the coming weeks, days, this transaction is going to go through, and Rogers is going to have majority. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So
75%. They'll have 75%.
So basically, it's their company. So what's interesting to note is there was a board meeting last week, an interesting board meeting of MLSE, in which we don't know who. I mean, they have regular board meetings. Board meetings typically happen either monthly or quarterly, what have you, whatever their cadence is. This was not a special board meeting by all accounts. It was regularly scheduled. It just happened to coincide a few days after the latest Maple Leaf letdown. And at that meeting, it appears that Keith Pelley either asked, requested, suggested that Brendan Shanahan's contract no longer not be extended. Would you say that's accurate?
Correct. Yeah.
Any idea? Like, it sounds like Shanahan was ready to present, and it sounds like there was no Raptor or other business that we've heard about at that meeting. Not that they have any obligation to share anything, but that's kind of been the drum beats out there. Any idea what really happened at that meeting? Have you heard anything?
My only understanding is that the whole week was designed around a group of board members meeting with Keith and Brendan to discuss the Maple Leafs.
Okay.
At a certain point, it was supposed to be Larry Tannenbaum in the room, Tony Staffieri, Edward Rogers.
Okay, time out. Tony is the CEO of Rogers, for those of you following along at home. Go ahead.
Yeah. Tony's really Edward's the owner, Tony's the doer.
Yep. Okay.
And when you look at the way that Rogers has moved the needle in the last 2 or 3 years, Tony Staffieri is the guy that should be getting the credit for how that's happened. Edward Rogers' vision, Tony Staffieri's execution.
Okay.
So, and I as I understand it, there was to be discussion of what happened this year.
Okay.
How good was the regular season? How good was the last 4 or 5 years? But why did we fall short? And then, as you said, it was supposed to be, it was apparently Keith's decision not to renew Brendan's contract, and they were going to do a press conference on Friday, which Keith did by himself, but and then they said, no, we'll just announce it as soon as possible. And so at 3:00 on last Thursday, they announced Brendan's really termination, because trust me, there are those of us that have not had our contracts renewed. We think we're fired. So
correct. So it's interesting. Words matter, as you just said. You said, interestingly, that some board members were supposed to meet with Keith and Brendan, but you said supposed to, which is past tense, which suggests that they didn't. Does that mean
Well,
that
I'm
they
not sure
didn't?
Larry was in the room,
Okay, so that's interesting.
because I think initially Larry was supposed to be in the room. I'm not sure Larry was in the room.
Okay. I mean, at this point, it seems almost irrelevant. No, I mean, it's Edward's organization. I mean, was anybody from Bell supposed to be in the room? Or they just said, we're out, it's yours, like we got it.
Right. And I think that Bell has bigger fish to fry in its corporate structure than to worry about a company that, in a matter of weeks, they're not part of. And
Okay.
they got to protect. And by the way, the only thing that Bell has to do in the long and short term is protect the asset that they think they've been promised. And the asset is Maple Leaf and Raptors games.
Right. Okay, so we're going to pause on the whole entity side stuff. And let's talk about Brendan and the Leafs just for a second. If you were going to holistically step back and evaluate his tenure as president, how would you grade it?
Positively.
Okay.
What I will tell you right now is that Brendan just wasn't the president of hockey ops. Brendan was the president. And nothing really occurred on the business side. Nothing really occurred in the bowl corporately without Brendan Shanahan's fingerprints on it. What Brendan did in the 11 years that he was with the Maple Leafs was he created a great deal of stability. And I think helped grow the brand. He protected the brand. We may not have agreed with some of his hockey operations decisions, but at the end of a decade of Brendan Shanahan's supervision, the Maple Leafs look to be, as a business, much, much stronger than they were 11 years ago. When you consider, we basically went through almost a decade of instability, of the decision to get rid of Pat Quinn, John Ferguson Jr., how the Brian Burke era ended. Cliff Fletcher came in between Ferguson and Burke it was a bit of a soap opera. What Brendan did was he cut through all that and did a very good job of building the brand. And if you're a corporation or corporations, you have to appreciate exactly what he did for your joint company.
So that's all fine and good for shareholders. It doesn't make fans feel a whole lot better, as you can imagine.
No, but except it doesn't. Except that the Maple Leaf brand. Let's get rid of recency bias, because recency bias has it the greatest Maple Leaf of all time would be Matt Sundin, or Doug Gilmour.
Correct.
Okay, so but that's 30 years. That's 30 years. This is a brand that's 100 years old.
No, I'm with you.
I mean, when you look up into the rafters, and Brendan, and it's important to understand that he did for Toronto what many people did for the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox for years.
I think you misunderstood my comment. What you talked a lot about was what he did for the business, and that doesn't make a whole lot of fans that happy. Having said that, a lot of fans are happier because they're suddenly more proud to wear the Maple Leaf jersey. First of all, the jersey looks better. The arena looks better. The fact that certain alumni are now constantly around the organization is better. But ultimately, what do fans want? They want to win. Right. 1967 is too familiar to everybody. That's all I meant. If you were sitting one-on-one having an adult cocktail with Brendan and nobody was around and he drank the truth serum, what do you think his biggest regret would be?
I don't know. First of all, I've never had that conversation with him.
No, I know this is just a guess, an educated guess, because as I said, I don't need to qualify.
I would think the biggest mistake was made was trying to reinvent a style of hockey management early on by suggesting that Mark Hunter and Kyle Dubas could live harmoniously as two general managers or two assistant general managers, one operating the pro side, one operating the amateur side. Brendan tried to do something different, and in the end, because he wanted to be the fulcrum. He wanted to be that guy. And what happened is that when you get three hockey people in a room, you have three arguments.
Yep.
and so what happened was that Mark Hunter didn't work out. Eventually, Kyle didn't work out. Lou had to come in to stabilize. In the midst of that was Mike Babcock. So all of a sudden you have four people in the room. And when you have four hockey people in the room, you have four arguments. So that's I would suggest that him trying to be, and I say this respectfully, progressive, thinking that there's a new way to do business, was a mistake.
There's a lot of noise out there about how the Leafs operated. That part of the reason Kyle left, got fired, and he did get fired.
Yes, he did.
Was that operationally speaking, it was very difficult to get things done under Brendan and under the board, and that there's a lot of
I don't buy that. I don't buy that.
Hang on,
I don't buy that.
There's a lot of rumblings that Brendan would kibosh deals or signings that Kyle wanted to do, and that it was very difficult to act swiftly to get certain things done because they required board approval. Now you can answer.
Well, the Brendan part, obviously Brendan and Kyle did not get along in the end. So
but
yes.
That's the end but that's at the end.
Yeah, but that, if you look at any good hockey organization, the two leading people in your hockey ops department won't get along 100% of the time.
Correct.
That's
Agreed.
a reality.
No,
and the expectation is that if you and I are those two guys and you're the president and I'm the general manager, I'm going to push you and you're going to push me.
That's right.
And we're both going to swear at each other every once in a while. And in the end, we're going to win, because that's the end goal. We're going to win.
Agreed.
I don't buy that the board got involved. I really don't buy that the board got involved. In my time there, and it was a different time with a different CEO. If your budget was approved, the only time you had to go back to the board was if you exceeded the budget.
Well, there's a cap, so you can't really exceed the budget.
Well, no,
as it relates to play,
trust me, you can exceed the budget, and the Maple Leafs exceeded the budget with all the people they hired.
I meant as it related to players in the middle of the season, etc.
Right. Yeah, but if you can, when you go into the long-term injured reserve and you go past the cap, then you got there's somebody you need to sign. Then you can, and you have to go back to the board for more money. That's just business.
The noise is more that if they wanted to make a significant trade mid-season, it could take exceptionally long as to what others may experience in the GM role to get the board to approve that. Are you saying that you don't think that's true? That is just noise?
I think that's just noise.
Okay. So Pelley had I'm just going to call it interesting press conference where it was pretty long and he didn't say a whole.
It was 28 minutes. It's 28 minutes.
He said a lot of words without saying a whole hell of a lot. If you were a Maple Leaf fan, how would you feel today after listening to that?
Well, I'm still, if I'm a Maple Leaf fan, I still am trying to figure out what happens. I'm the pragmatic fan. Sure, we clamored for someone to pay the price. We clamored as a Maple Leaf fan for someone to lose their job. And they did. Brendan lost his job. I'm not sure how that affects re-signing Mitch Marner or John Tavares or the core four or Morgan Riley. And, I'm not sure how that helps our goaltending. So, there are this town is a fascinating town. It is a fascinating town. I don't think there's any other city in the National Hockey League that is so focused on people who don't play the game. And we talk more about them.
I agree.
When Brian Burke was the manager here, Brian Burke was the most famous person with the Maple Leafs. Mike Babcock was the most famous person with the Maple Leafs. It did change a little bit, which is what I think Brendan tried to get this changed. The focus started to go back to being on the players. Started to go to Nylander and Tavares and Matthews. But there's people here get focused on control and who's in control and what's going on. And so that's really in the end what happened. And if I'm a fan, I'm still worried about the day-to-day operation. And they have a good manager in Brad Treliving, and people seem to like what Craig Berube did.
So I'm going to say that, first of all, I've lived in 2 other markets where it's been identical. So one, I live in Seattle. I've lived in Seattle for a long time. There's no bigger person in Seattle than Pete Carroll. And I don't care who was playing for the Seahawks.
Right.
Pete Carroll could sneeze and that's all people would talk about.
Yep.
And when I was in Miami, whether it was Jimmy Johnson, Don Shula, what's his name? Dave Wannstedt, Pat Riley, same story.
Well, like I said, not when LeBron was there, not
I
when
wasn't
Dan
there.
Marino was.
Yeah.
Not when Dan Marino was there.
So I was there at the Jimmy Johnson, Dan Marino era. That's when I was there. So whatever Jimmy had to say, but forget that. Here's my point. I actually thought the 2 most interesting things that Pelley said was, one, he needs to repair the relationship between the fans and the players and the team and the media. And this is just my own personal opinion. I think part of the reason that we're exactly where you said we are is that both of those things have happened. And I think that the reason there's so much focus on the Babcocks, Berubes, who the GM, who the president is because Shanahan taking the torch from Lou has put such a walled garden around the players that there really isn't that much of a relationship. And I think for me personally, listening to the last 10 days, because I've been here, it almost feels like we're back to the Dion Phaneuf days of Salute-gate and the Muskoka, whatever they were, where these guys actually aren't loved. I mean, they're loved when they're scoring or whatever, but they don't really know them. There's not a whole lot of, this is not Gilmore, Sundin,
they are too
Domi.
protected, Jonah. They
Right.
are too protected.
So how could the fans have any affiliation or admiration for them when they're hidden from both them and the media?
I think that's fair. I think there needs to be a ton more transparency. I think there and say what you want about Lou Lamoriello, but if you were on a Lou Lamoriello team, there wasn't, well, we'll give you 3, and this might be too much inside for the regular listener, but now what happens in most NHL cities is at the end of the game, the media either request 2 or 3 players, and they come out and they get assigned. You're doing local TV, you're doing the network, you're doing radio, you're doing, you're doing the websites and the newspapers. That's not the way Lou works. Lou works, everybody's out, everybody answers. If you sit there and they don't talk to you, that's fine, but you have to be made available and accessible. That has, and that really has morphed into something now. And I think that a lot of it has to do with since COVID. I think it's when everybody, you couldn't put every player on Zoom. So you put 2 or 3 on Zoom and the player said, hey, we like this. You know what? That should change. Everybody should be accountable. You end up, media, and here's the thing, media will end up going to the same 6 guys because they have better quotes, but everybody should be accountable. So transparency and accountability are 2 things that I think need to be addressed. And I think Keith's media background, I think he will try to do that.
If you read Doug Smith's book on the Raptors, he tells a story about how one night DeMar DeRozan called him because he was going through something. And the only reason that happened is because they developed a relationship in the locker room. Yeah. That ain't happening anymore. Like, it's just not.
Not as much. You're right. Not as much. But here's the deal. It's a two-way street. The media people have to work at relationships too.
100%.
And that doesn't happen like it used to. That doesn't. Media people.
The game has changed for sure, both ways.
Well, but yeah, no. So I think that's a fair comment. The other thing is, and your reference to Doug and what the NBA does. The NBA rules are much more strict about media access. The locker room for an NBA team is open 2 hours, open before the game. And the media can go in and talk to the coach and talk to the players before the game. That doesn't happen in hockey. And so, but that's because David Stern and now Adam Silver understood the necessity of having people available for interview. And that if you're running a hockey team or running a sports team, you need to create relationships, positive relationships with the media. You do. Is it the be all and end all? No, but you need to do it in order to create a bond with your fans.
And I thought it was extremely telling that whomever was running the press conference on Friday said, we're going to take 3 more questions. And Keith took 3 more questions. Then he goes, oh, wait, Rosie has a question. That was the 4th. Mm-hmm. And he took it. And
Keith is smart. Keith has some savvy.
Well, that was really smart, and it was really telling. And she actually asked a very good question. So if you were to guess right now, they have a monster critical questions coming up as it relates to the hockey team. One of them is on Tavares. One of them is on Marner. Who's making that decision ultimately? Is it Pelley? Is it Tree Living? Like, at the end of the day, whose decision is it?
Well, I think it's Brad Treliving's. I think that has been firmly placed on his desk. Who's in charge of hockey operations for the Toronto Maple Leafs? Brad Treliving.
So fans should take to heart that Pelley is not going to take him at his word. When he said, I'm not a hockey guy, I'm not going to interfere, I'm there as a sounding board. I don't have an ulterior motive when I'm asking him. I'm actually asking him.
I heard that too. And to be honest, when the question was asked at the press conference, and he said, what do you do with Tavares and Marner? And he said, that's not really a topic for today. But then he wandered around and then said, and by the way, that is a decision for the hockey operations group, not for me. That was the best answer he gave in the whole press conference, because it cut to the chase. Who's making the decision?
As long as it is truthful. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm just filling in the blank. That's all.
The one thing I will tell you about Keith Pelley, and it might get him in trouble every once in a while, is he does tell the truth.
Okay. Then Leafs fans should be very pleased with what that press conference was if he's telling the truth. So the most uncomfortable I saw him in that press conference, and I don't know him, I've never met him, was when he was asked about Masai. And he's got the TFC that don't have a president now, and he's got the Leafs that don't have a president now.
I don't think they need it. I don't think they need a president.
I agreed. So he was asked about the Raptors, and he looked genuinely uncomfortable. He said they won a championship, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the rebuild, they're in the middle of a rebuild, and I'm looking forward to the season. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Is Masai, Masai's got a little over a year left, I understand, and 15 large US coming his way. They're not going to walk away. John's eyebrows just went through the roof of his house. They're not going to walk away from 15 large. If he wants to go to Atlanta and somebody wants to write them a check, write that check, that's a different story. But do you see that model eventually following the Raptors' way?
That's a good question. I think it's feasible. I think it's possible. I do believe that is something that we're going to have to wait until after the ownership structure is announced, because the reason for that is there is still money on the contract. There really is. The Brendan situation, there was no money left on the contract.
Correct.
So it was a going forward situation. Whether Masai, we all know it was a pretty public feud.
Yep.
Between Edward Rogers and Larry and Masai about his last contract. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see. But it would not surprise me that in some level of restructure, and the one thing is you have to give. There's a lot of things I don't think people understand. This is a company that has 800 employees. Keith has taken a year, all the while trying to figure out who's doing what and where to understand the organizational chart.
Right.
So, and that I think is the one place where Rogers Corporation will probably have some say of how the org chart works in the future. So I think we have to wait and see on that one.
So interesting pivot, right? You don't have my notes, but that's exactly where they take me, because it has long been rumored that Edward is dying to get the Blue Jays out of Rogers Inc. into a new entity. And now that he's got these teams, it kind of paves the way to do that. So assuming
yes and no, because that can't really happen until Mr. Tannenbaum is completely removed from the picture.
Understood. So
because I'm not bringing the Blue Jays into MLSE when Larry still owns 25%.
Understood. So let's call it 12 months from now, whenever it is. Like, it has to be done by a certain date. Doesn't mean it's not going to be done sooner, whatever. At some point, that's going to happen. We'll both nod our heads and say, yes, that at some point that will happen. There will be an entity, another entity not under Rogers that controls these teams. What then happens if it's not within the year? If it's within the year, there's another president who's involved, whose contract is also up. Where do you think Mr. Shapiro's nerves are right now? John just shook his head at me.
Well, no, I mean, because first of all, I've never met Edward Rogers. And I don't know. I can only assume that his relationship with Mark, who, by the way, I like Mark. Mark has always been good to me. I can only measure it that way. I don't know what their relationship is, other than, Edward has trusted Mark for a long period of time. Edward trusted Mark to renovate the building to the cost of, $400 million, if not more.
Plus Dunedin.
Plus Dunedin, right, plus Dunedin, plus signed Vladdy, which, by the way, I think is probably bigger than both of them, isn't it?
Well, and I think if we're all going to be fair, I think it was probably more Edward's doing than Mark's doing, if we're all going to be honest.
What, the Vladdy contract?
Yeah.
You might know more about that than I do.
Okay. But one would think that if this is the new model and we're going to go presidentless, that Keith Pelley is going to run all of them. Fair?
No, I don't think that's fair at all. I don't know. I think it's too early. I think it's far too early to think that. And
let me ask the question.
I don't know. I don't know what MLSE is going to look like in 18 months. I really don't. I mean, is the soccer team going to be part of the still? What about the Argonauts? Are they going to be? And by the way, I'm the only person that calls them the Argonauts rather than the Argos. So I think there's I still think there's a ton of moving parts to figure out with that and how it works.
So the reason that John is likely talking about those two organizations is there's rumblings in the marketplace that those two teams are not going to be part of the future organization, and that perhaps they're going to be joining the WNBA franchise in Toronto under Larry Tannenbaum's ownership. Fair?
We've all heard that.
Right. Nothing's happened, but that is certainly a drumbeat in the marketplace. Okay, so we don't know about the Jays. at some point they're going to come under the same umbrella. What that means and if it's more than a year, we don't know if Shapiro is even going to be extended by then, so it could be moot. That takes us back to the fun world of television. We've now talked about the teams, and now we talk about TV, because as this was all unfolding before the Brendan stuff, Rogers re-upped their deal with, Gary did literally pull the rabbit out of the proverbial hat. Getting
amazing, really amazing,
right? I mean, amazing. I would imagine, I just have to believe that when he walked into that meeting with his ownership group after that, he got a standing ovation, right?
Well, he certainly got something, because it was for him to come up with a dollar figure like that in American funds, because the last deal was in Canadian funds. I mean, opened a ton of people's eyes.
And just so everyone knows, there's very few people, certainly in North America, who understand the world of hockey broadcasting from a business perspective better than John. I mean, I've just qualified you. So the fact that Gary literally pulled water from a rock in a world where he literally had no other competitors. Rogers Bell wasn't invited formally back to the table to negotiate. I'm sure Gary knew what he could or couldn't get, but he got Edward to write, as Thornton Mellon said in my favorite movie, as Dean Martin said in my favorite movie, Back to School, it was a really big check, right? Like,
well, here's the thing. And this ties the bow on everything, because a lot of what I think Rogers believes in the game of hockey, we saw a year ago in Edmonton. And we saw, again, this is not about, the purity of the game of hockey. This is about activation against a brand. And what Rogers did last year in the Stanley Cup playoffs, in their activation of the Oilers going to the Stanley Cup final, was nothing short of spectacular. Nothing short of spectacular. It was from I think they could probably write books on how Rogers was able to do that. And that fueled a lot. And that hope, this dovetails in where the Maple Leafs fit. This all occurred in a 10-year period, 12-year period, without the Maple Leafs getting past the second round. And so the answer, the question becomes around the Rogers boardroom, I'm sure, well, if we can do that with the Oilers, what can we do with the Maple Leafs? And so it all gets tied together at the same, to me, this is, and that's why, for 12 years, 11 now, because they have another year on the original deal, they've been unable to do it with the Maple Leafs getting past a certain point in May.
I think it's more about how successful the Four Nations Cup was, how that captivated both countries. No. And that's okay. You can say no. And it's the same story with the Blue Jays. Why do they spend so much money? Because if they're sniffing competitiveness come late August, early September, the dome is full, the TV ratings are through the roof. And if they're anywhere near a playoff, even radio ratings are good, right? Like, so what's more incredible to me is that he did this deal, from what I understand, without any commitment or promises from anybody else as a sub-licensee of those games.
Well, we've subsequently found out that there is a question of who's going to own the French rights.
Because TVA has said, not I.
Well, I read an article quoting Mr. Pelley saying we lost $250 million in the last 10 years.
Correct.
And they put 100 on average of the $425 million for the 12 years, they put $100 million a year in to protect themselves and to be competitive against RDS.
Right.
So that's an interesting one. I do think that there's probably somebody out there, whether it's an existing partner like Amazon or another streaming service, that would be interested in not only sub-licensing some games, but sub-licensing the French market, which is a very, very good, prolific hockey market, and playoffs, which is where most of the lucrative dollars are.
Right. So Amazon has been wildly successful. Their average, from an audience perspective, it's not totally dissimilar from what Rogers used to get, but from a demographics perspective, they're skewing way younger. They're hitting all the prime demographics that they want.
You know why they're skewing way younger?
Is it Amazon customers younger and they know how to use technology?
And they don't have cable TV.
Correct.
These are all the cord cutters. Or Gary,
cord
on our
nevers.
show, Gary
Cord
called
nevers.
Cord nevers.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So these people, they have the apps on their televisions and on their computers, and
that's right.
and
it's natural,
and it's a natural progression. It's brilliant, and Amazon is just scratching the surface of what they can do eventually with it.
Well, the production quality is incredible. So
yep, they've done a good job.
All right, so Ron's deal, as my understanding is, for the most part, the talent deals on Hockey Night, on Rogers Hockey, all marries up to the current deal. Everyone's deals expires at the end of next season.
That's what I understand.
What do you see happening with the key players? Ron, Elliott, Chris Cuthbert. Let's just go with those three.
I don't know why they wouldn't continue. Why not?
Well, it is Ron's been there a long time. That doesn't necessarily mean it should end. It could be a natural transition. Same with Chris Cuthbert.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think either had enough or no?
You never have enough.
Okay.
I'm older than both of them, and you never have enough.
So you think?
I think Chris is as good as it gets, and I know that Ron is a polarizing figure, but Ron still has a tremendous amount of talent.
Okay, so then let's pivot south of the border. That deal is coming up.
I have 5 minutes, by the way.
Okay, we'll wrap right. This is my last question. We're at the end of my long list. The U.S. deal is, I think it's got 2 more seasons. Is that right?
3, I think. 3, I think.
3?
Yeah, I think so.
So what do you think is new? So I think Gary has 2 or 3 things he wants to do. He wants a CBA, he wants a U.S. TV deal, and he probably wants at least Atlanta and one other market to go to, right? So what's going to happen in the U.S. TV deal?
Gosh, well, what the landscape is so, it's almost like quicksand these days. But I think with the NBA moving away from Turner,
yep.
Although that's not the official name of the company anymore, but I call it Turner because it's easy to say.
Right.
I think that, and the economics of hockey, it's cheaper. I think it survives at TNT, and then I think we have to figure out what Disney wants to do with it, and whether Disney likes it, or does Disney feel that we can spend the money better elsewhere.
Last question then. U.S. ratings are down.
Yeah.
Does that have an impact? And then 2, does getting a team back in Atlanta matter to what you're calling Turner?
No, none. The latter, not a thing. Nothing to do with it. That doesn't matter. It's not like the Braves. What was the first question again?
Ratings in the U.S.
Because we're still a regional sport in the United States. We really are. But
regional sport in Canada.
No, we're not. No, look at no, we're not. No. You watch the numbers come back as we get closer to the Stanley Cup final. Everybody's just pissed off in Ontario because the Maple Leafs are out. So they've taken 10 days to re-enter society. But when you think of New York, no team in the playoffs. Islanders or Rangers. Boston, out. Philadelphia, out. Pittsburgh, great hockey market, out. Buffalo, great hockey market, out. Chicago, great hockey market, out. Detroit, great hockey market, out. So all the driving media markets in the United States didn't have any postseason hockey. And then the teams that replaced them, for the most part, were Canadian teams. And that regional sportism that we exist in the United States. And I love the Winnipeg Jets, and I love the Ottawa Senators, and they're great for our country. but they do not move the needle.
Right.
One
I got it.
So that's the reality.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time. Always fascinating to talk to you and always good to see you.
Jonah, it's always good to spend a Monday morning with you.
Likewise. Happy Memorial Day.
Memorable.
Exactly. Till next time.
Okay.
Thank you to John Shannon for joining today in the podcast. Awesome episode. As I said, I've never, ever had a list of topics to go through, but I thought it was important to map it out to tell a story. I hope you learned as much as I did about what exactly is going on. It is the most fascinating time, not only here in Toronto, but in the sports broadcasting, sports media world. I assume that is part of the reason that you join in. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you liked it. As always, please subscribe wherever you are listening or watching. If you want to appear, or advertise, you can reach me on all the social medias at Yyzsportsmedia. You can reach me at jonah@yyzsportsmedia.com. And we will see you next time in the press row. Thank you.